ホワイトソックスが同地区首位攻防戦で3連勝、タイガースをスイープしました。日本時間8月17日、村上宗隆選手が所属するシカゴホワイトソックスは同地区2位のデトロイトタイガースと対戦し、3連戦を3連勝しました。このシリーズで村上選手は2本のホームランを放つなど大活躍。その働きぶりにホワイトソックス推しも村上選手の価値を再確認しました。タイガースに3連勝したことによる喜びと村上選手に対する評価を語った様子を日本語字幕でご紹介します。
Jim, man, what a weekend for the Chicago White Sox, sweeping the Detroit Tigers. And I know that it seems like with every passing week, we still have this hint of disbelief in our voices that this season is actually unfolding the way it has for the White Sox. And after stumbling against the Reds, and I don't blame anyone looking at these 6 games against the Tigers on the road and going to Wrigley Field to play against the Cubs, if you are concerned that maybe the White Sox would trip and be closer to 500 and the division lead would be in trouble. Instead, now listen to us. The White Sox, Jim, are 5.5 games ahead of everybody in the American League Central. So with this series sweep, is the postseason dream becoming more real in your opinion?
Oh, it should be. I invoked a magic number in the recap for the first time after Sunday's game. I'm not at the point where I think the magic number should be a daily pursuit, but over the course of the weekend, winning 3 games against the direct challenger second place team to remove 6 games from a magic number in one weekend in now the second half of August, that is worth noting. So now that the magic number is down to 34, that's still a long ways away. I remember from 2012, that stands out of the season where the magic number come September didn't really go down much, and it just hung on one number for far too long. And so that's why I'm not going to make this a daily feature of recaps. But I think just when you have that kind of performance, that kind of statement against the second place team, the team that was the hottest team in the American League, especially in terms of run differential, and you knock that down so dramatically, it's worth noting.
And when you take a look at the postseason odds for the White Sox, and we grabbed these from Fangraphs. So for those that are listening to the audio version of this podcast, I'll talk through it. But for those that are watching on YouTube for Fangraphs, the White Sox chances of now making the postseason are at 73%. Before opening day, Jim, it was 1%. So to look at this graph, and now Cleveland has the second best odds. They're at 26%. And that's mostly because supposedly they have the easiest schedule remaining in Major League Baseball. The Twins are at 20%. The Tigers now dropped to 19%. The Royals are at 0%. The Royals actually had the second best odds of making the postseason on opening day in the American League Central. So it's great looking at this graph and looking at the gray line and just like almost skyrocket because of what happened in this weekend, Jim, at 73% to make the playoffs. But when you look at the American League Central odds of winning the division, the White Sox are at 64%. And this is why, for me, it's becoming more real. And as a season ticket holder, podcast listeners, we have not received our playoff invoices yet. When they come, though, it's been a minute since that's happened. We laughed at it in 2022, Jim, when they came in, because it was just absurd that the White Sox were offering it at that time. But now we have to take it seriously. And the White Sox also added some of their lead against the Houston Astros, and they're looking at that 2 seed in the American League, which means that if you look ahead, if you're making plans, everyone that follows the White Sox, fans, media, like, we may have plans, Jim, on October 3rd, and that might be game 1 of the American League Division Series. And for all White Sox fans that were booking vacations in October, maybe you want to change your plans because you may suddenly have plans with how the White Sox have been playing. But I don't know about you, Jim, but looking at those graphs and looking at those percentages, that's where at one part, Jim, it becomes more real for me. But at the
Mhm.
same time, I just kind of chuckle and be like, this is just how far we've come in this season from opening day to now.
It's funny when you look at the projections before the season and you see the White Sox have a 1% chance of making the postseason, or I think Pacoda might have had 2 point something percent. And you look at Pacoda has this graph that shows you all of the outcomes from the 1,000 simulations they run and just the spread of wins that are possible. And you see like the very front edge of that win curve being, high 80s or something like that. And you think that, okay, that's like the 1 out of 1,000, or that sliver represents like 60 out of the 1,000 that were run. And you think of everything that has to go into the White Sox having that, and it requires like a lot of, over performances, we'll say, just based on what the projections were. Like Miguel Vargas, like the 99th percentile projection has nothing on what he's doing right now. Tristan Peters, I'm sure he's similar. And then you see like all of the failure elsewhere. Like you see the Mariners, especially, I think they're probably one of the teams most, I guess, creating the most wins available for other teams to snatch. And you have the rest of the AL West is kind of a disappointment. The Blue Jays have been a disappointment. The Orioles have been a big bummer. And all of those teams creating win vacancies for some team to come in. And the White Sox have done that with the way they played. And so it's funny when you look back at that now and you look at the standings, and on one hand, the reaction is, oh, what do these algorithms know, these projection systems know? On the other hand, it's like, well, they did account for this in a sliver of all the simulations they ran, and I guess this is what it would look like. It would look like the Royals, another team crapping the bed, and maybe they weren't going to be a favorite like the Mariners were, but they certainly are leaving 20 wins on the table or something like that, based on the pace that they're currently on, or at least I would say like maybe 15 wins. But there are so many wins for the taking that this is what it looks like when the entire American League is down and the White Sox are talented enough, explosive enough to have these outbursts that allow them to overcome what deficiencies they have.
So looking at this series, again, the White Sox sweeping the Tigers. They won game 1, 9-5. Game 2, they won 4-3. Game 3, they won 7-5. In the first game and the third game, they were down by 3 against the Tigers. The Tigers seem to be in a great position to win those games against the White Sox. But it is this power in the lineup that we have just been seeking for this White Sox team, Jim. And in the second game, I give them a lot of credit. It was a key double by Colson Montgomery, a 2-run double to get them to 3 runs. And then Andrew Benintendi, being the vet, was able to pull through to have the game-winning hit for the White Sox. So they didn't hit any home runs in the second game. But in the first game, they hit 4. Miguel Vargas had 2 in that game, and Murakami had a home run in that game. And then in game 3, again, it's Vargas and Murakami. And bless your heart, Drew Romo, with that big 2-run homer to cut it from a 4-1 deficit to 4-3 and spark some hope that this White Sox team can once again come back. That's the most impressive thing that I took away from this series win for the White Sox, is that even though the pitching wasn't all that great, they didn't stay in the pen, to use your analogy that you've been using many times this season, the White Sox ability to kick out. And it's really the home run power that powered as far as this series win, in my opinion, Jim.
Yeah, I mean, that makes such a huge difference when you can't get that instant offense. And I think you can supplement that by saying the outfielders, the non-fixtures in the lineup, the Tristan Peters reaching base 7 times in 3 games. You had Randall Grichuk basically being an automatic double when he came to the plate. Those kind of supplemental performances, I think, go a long way to maximize the power when it arrives. And then you have Drew Romo coming up with a big hit in the 9th spot. Chase Mydroth, when he's down 7th or lower and hitting like he's hitting, he's useful. So yeah, it's a combination, I think, of just the instant offense and the ability to all of a sudden turn the tides really quick. And then just the steadiness of the 1 through 9 to where any part of this lineup can start something. And, we saw it on Sunday with just the way they scored runs, the variety of ways they did it, like Tristan Peters doubling and scoring in a couple productive groundouts. Like they needed that run after falling behind 3-0. They got it done. I'm thinking back to Sam Antonacci hustling out a double when it looked like just a routine single up the middle, and he kind of caught Javier Baez napping a little bit in center, and those 90 feet mattered scoring a run. You had Munetaka Murakami getting caught in a rundown on a contact play, but then extending the rundown long enough for the runners to backfill second and third. So you saw the power, but you also saw the White Sox, and I shouldn't say they didn't leave runs on the table, because they had went 4 for 18 with runners in scoring position one game. They went 1 for 10 on Sunday. So still not the perfect performance with runners in scoring position. I think most teams are saying that about themselves in 2026, but they create opportunities in a lot of ways to where they don't have to come up with a big hit in a given inning to turn the tides, or they don't have to have homers from Murakami and Vargas and Montgomery to make it work. Like they can scrape by in other ways and buy time for either the hitters show up or like it's a team really working well together. When you have that going on, and then a pretty flexible bullpen with a lot of ways to cover for needing a bullpen game, or Jose Urquidy to cover 3 1/3, or having Sean Burke at less than full power. Like they didn't have everything in their favor, and yet they kept finding ways, one way, on one side of the ball or the other, to just make up the gap.
We'll talk more about the White Sox pitchers in a moment, because I do think that is a key topic, especially as the White Sox continue this path where they play 16 games in 16 days. But speaking of the home run power, looking at the White Sox home run leaders, Miguel Vargas and Munetaka Murakami are now tied. They both have 28 home runs. Colson Montgomery is third on the team with 26 home runs. So, Jim, unlike previous seasons, we have a spicy home run race for the White Sox. We don't have to debate who's actually going to reach 20 home runs for the White Sox. So this is a nice change of pace for the Chicago White Sox. But I do ask you, who is going to win the White Sox home run race between Murakami, Vargas, and Montgomery?
I think it's going to be Murakami. That feels a little bit chalky to me to say, and not at all spicy, but it's just so effortless when he hits them. He hits a lot that look like they're mishits, and they still carry over the wall. So when he has that kind of margin for error with regards to the quality of his contact, still generating over the fence power, I think that just gives him a huge leg up. And I think Vargas is somebody who can do it. And I'm thinking back to last year when like Lenyn Sosa won the home run title with 22, and it was just very uninspiring. Not much of a chase, you would say. But yeah, when it comes to Vargas being somebody who, like, he would have won the home run title going away last year, he certainly has the ability to get on heaters and really rip the ball. But I think he's still somebody he needs his best contact to get over the fence. He's just making his best contact more often, and that helps him a lot. But I think just Murakami, his ability to mishit the ball, or just the way his swing is angled is such that creates so much backspin that more fly balls of his get over the fence than I think most hitters in general, and most power hitters
especially his ability now to go opposite field. Like, I think that's the difference between Murakami, Vargas, and Colson Montgomery. Montgomery and Vargas, they need to pull the ball. But as we have seen recently from Murakami, he's starting to demonstrate, Jim, that opposite field power, being able to go to left field with his home runs. So I'll give you Murakami. I'm going to take Vargas. I feel like Vargas, he loves hitting at Wrigley Field. He had a huge series last year in Wrigley Field. To me, it's just so heartwarming because we could see 3 30-plus home run hitters in this lineup, Jim. Like, I feel like Colson Montgomery is going to get to 30. I feel like Vargas and Murakami are both going to get to 35 homers. Murakami to get to 35 homers after missing quite a bit of time with this hamstring issue. Very impressive. But man, I've been asking for this. I think a lot of White Sox fans have been asking for this because despite what Ozzie Guillen says, his best teams were the ones that put the ball in the seats. They hit more than 200 home runs. And I feel like the White Sox finally have that right mixture because, I mean, Andrew Benintendi has 12, Chase Maidroth has 12, and they're starting to get some more home runs, especially from the role players like Drew Romo and Tristan Peters. I feel like the White Sox are going to get to that 200 home run milestone this season. And it's a big reason why they have a comfortable lead now in the American League Central. But let us know in the comments section who your, I guess, pick to click is and who's going to win the White Sox home run race between Miguel Vargas, Munetaka Murakami, and Colson Montgomery.
The White Sox swept the Tigers in Detroit. Gosh, that feels good to say again. And now lead the AL Central by season high 5.5 games. If that is to be correct on the podcast rundown. I know
it is.
But I feel pretty good. I feel pretty good about that. But Nick, why don't you kick us off, buddy? What are your overall takeaways from the last week of games so far for the White Sox?
Yeah, it was an up and down week, but obviously I'd much rather they ended the way they did than, sweep the Reds and win one in Detroit. So overall, very good series. There are a few things that I think we can talk about, we will talk about. So I'm not going to say all of them. I'll wait till you guys are done too. But the two I want to start with, one is that I think we almost aren't giving enough appreciation to Will Venables sometimes, just in the sense that every single time this team looks like, oh, maybe, the cracks are starting to show. Maybe they're not going to, win the division after all. Whenever I've thought that this season, they immediately sweep somebody, win 2 out of 3. They just bounce back so well. And I know a lot of that is on the players and their mentality. I'm not trying to take away credit from them. But I think Venable also deserves a lot of credit just for the way that they're always bouncing back. That's something that I think a manager definitely contributes to, sort of keeping them focused to play and all that kind of stuff. And then the other shout out I want to give quickly here is to the bullpen, just because they had to cover so many innings in this Detroit series, especially that first game with, the Newcomb opener game. They only got, I think, 3 1/3 out of Urquidy, which wasn't terrible, but still, they had to cover a lot of innings. Taylor pitched back-to-back games and multiple innings in the first one, which I don't think he's really done this year. Brian Hudson was really good. Obviously, Newcomb, I already said. Just a huge team effort. And the bullpen is the kind of thing where you only really hear about it when they're giving in runs and everyone's saying they're bad. So because they were so good this series, and then they kind of deserve the shout-out for really helping us get the sweep.
Yeah, I'd really say that I think with the pressure really starting to get on, and I know that a lot of the players, even in post-game interviews, were talking about how kind of important this series was. I think what I walk away from this series most impressed about is that they continued to have the same resilience they have all year when the lights were on them. Because obviously there was a lot of added importance to the series. And I think that, you even look at today's game, we're here on Sunday when the Sox were down early because Burke did not look great. I thought it was awesome just to see the battle back in those middle to late innings. And I think that, like Nick said, today was another day where we had to cover some innings because we didn't get the length out of Burke that we had been used to and expected to. Ultimately, that resilience and that kind of fight, that's why this team is showing that they can be good. I mean, they even showed it in the Red series. Obviously, the outcome of the series wasn't what we hoped for. But I think of that 9-8 game, of that just so many things went wrong. An unbelievable amount of things went wrong. They almost came back to tie it. And this is something that I think is a trademark of this team, is never say die. I feel like they never just roll over and die and, okay, the game's over. We're used to thinking that as Sox fans, but in 2026, that is not the case.
Yeah, and I think the offense really in Detroit, it speaks volumes to what this team can be, because you really have to look at the fact that we really were not going to let Detroit be into the series. It felt like every time they would get their bats going, we would just once again, gain a 2-3 run lead and be like, oh, no. We're not even going to let this one be close. And, they're basically, to summarize both of what you guys said, it's grit. There's so much grit with this baseball team of just, we're going to battle every single inning. We're going to battle every single game. And some of them are going to turn out in our favor, like most of them have, and some aren't. The Cincinnati series was frustrating because it kind of felt like a little bit of a trap. I wish we would have highlighted it a little bit on the episode last week about the potential of Cincinnati series being a trap, because it was expected by everyone in the baseball world that the White Sox are going to win that series against Cincinnati. Maybe they drop one, but for the most part, going into this 16-game stretch, they're gonna take care of business in Cincinnati, and then they have a huge series going against Detroit. Obviously, it didn't work that way for us. It feels like everything that could go wrong against us did go wrong in that Cincinnati series, but we showed that we were not going to let that carry over into Detroit, because we knew, regardless of what happened in that Cincinnati series, we needed to handle business on the road in Detroit, and we did every last bit of that and more. I want to hear more about what happened with Sean Burke, because it sounds like it was such an anomaly of a game, and it looked like such an anomaly of a game. I almost wonder if maybe he was a little bit under the weather or something was going on, because it seemed like his fastball was down a little bit compared to what it usually is as well. But good on the offense to be able to just bring the bats, pick him up, and have us continue to move forward, man. Anytime you can pull out the brooms, especially against a team like Detroit, dude, it's reason for celebration. And hopefully this is all the momentum we need going into the rest of this long trip that we've got coming up here. And honestly, I think a guy that deserves a lot of credit when it comes to the bats is a guy like Chase Bydrock. Brett, I love that you're on this episode, because I remember specifically a game last year that me and you we sat like first row down third baseline. And I think a good 20-minute conversation was had about just how Chase Mydroth's going to end up being a star, and people are underselling it. And like, how do you feel about Chase Mydroth right now?
I mean, we may have been calling it a long time ago at this point, but I think just the insane heater that he's been on is awesome. And I think that the type of ball he's playing right now kind of summarizes a little bit of the narrative of this year a little bit, where we thought that we were seeing maybe him sell out for power a little bit too heavy. And maybe we were seeing a lot of those harder swings that we weren't used to seeing him do, maybe a little bit more strikeout heavy, which sure, he's striking out a little bit more this year. But since the All-Star break, and maybe even to extrapolate a little bit of a farther sample, maybe over the last month, like even a little bit longer than the All-Star break, I think that he has really found this great middle ground of being the single slap hitter that we know he can be, with some additional power to it. And I think that one thing that I actually had pointed out on Twitter early in the year, he was doing a lot of tinkering with his batting stance. I think he's finally found one where he sits the bat on his shoulder now and lets it sit there. He's not really doing the bat-to-bat tinkering that we did before. It's good that we've seen him find something cool. And hey, he's been hitting some homers recently and just kind of spraying balls everywhere. It's been a lot of fun to watch. And also, just as a side note, the defense floor, exactly what we expect of him. That really hasn't been, any sort of different, really. I've always liked his play at second base, and I think he's continued well at that. And he even had a nice game at short when he had to fill in that.
Yeah, I like that you brought that up at the end there, Brett, because even last year, I want to say it was before Colson Montgomery got promoted, Mydroth was playing a decent amount of shortstop. And I was very, very impressed by how smooth he was at short. And I think the only real knock you could have on him at short is his arm strength, but it was not terrible either. Like, it was good enough to make the plays that a shortstop would need to make. Like, he's a plus defender at short, just hasn't really needed to play there very frequently, which is totally fine. It's good to have people like that from a versatility point of view. But yeah, Mydroth has been so impressive lately. And the defense too, I mean, that's another thing I want to bring up about the other thing I should say I wanted to bring up about this series is I felt that the White Sox defense in the Detroit series, especially the infield defense, was very sharp, because Detroit was hitting a lot of 100+ mile-an-hour ground balls at the infield. And there were some picks that Vargas had today on Sunday's game that I thought were fantastic. There was the one obviously that Murakami had in the 7th or 8th inning that may or may not have saved the game, because it would have been an RBI single if it got past him. Like, the whole defense was just completely on point this weekend. And Mydroth, of course, is usually a big part of that as well. But really everybody, I can't think of any moments where I was disappointed in the defense. And then you had some of the more fluke plays, like the Hagen Smith 107-mile-an-hour self-defense catch, which, we'll take it. So, yeah, I'm really impressed by Mydroth. Obviously, it's good to have a podcast of 3 big Mad Dog fans on here, but also just the defense in general has been so sharp.
Yeah, no, the defense was something that I was never totally worried about, but really just a guy that looks comfortable out there. And anytime you get a mic'd up of him out there too, or like get see a clip of how jacked up he gets towards the end of a game once they win it, whether it's just on the final ground ball or anything, it's like this guy he's got the juice. He just keeps everybody going out there. He keeps everybody fresh. And somebody said this to me on Twitter early in the year, and I'm like, man, that is quite the take to have. But there was already some comparisons to a guy like Dustin Pedroia for what a Chase Mydroth does for us. And while I'm not going to sit here and say he's going to have a Dustin Pedroia-esque career, it really does feel like that's the type of impact he's having in our lineup right now, is what a Dustin Pedroia would have had for those, mid to late 2010s White Sox teams. And he's a guy that just brings it every single day. And he's a guy that has really sneaky power, kind of like you alluded to, Brett. He can definitely hit. He can hit a little bit everywhere in the outfield. He can hit gaps. But as we saw in the Boston series, and it probably had a little bit of an FU attached to those home runs a little bit more, but it shows he can hit with power too. So I just love the progression of him, and then you look at guys like Miguel Vargas, who was already brought up, and even Tristan Peters, who is starting to bounce back as well. Really feels like this offense is all moving in the right direction. It feels like all guys are kind of on the right run of where this team needs to be, because as we've seen in the last week, we're going to need our offense to be able to pick us up. And, it's just being realistic about where our pitching rotation is as well, man. We're going to have those days where the offense is going to need to carry the load, and it seems like everybody's starting to get hot at the right time.
Yeah, I agree. And with Vargas in particular, I was a little surprised, to be honest, by the amount of people who were starting to maybe have some doubts a little bit, given how he was a bit colder out of the All-Star break. But the thing about Vargas is, whether he's hot or cold at the plate, the one consistent thing about him this year is that he's been unlucky a lot. Like, he has a lot of line drives right at the shortstop's mid, right at the center field, or whatever it may be. And that you can see that in the numbers too. Like, he has statistically been a little bit unlucky. But this sort of this week he had, because he had a homer against Cincinnati too, I believe, was really needed for him just to start seeing some of those balls, go over the fence, or in many cases, I think he had several doubles as well. And like you said, Duke Peters has been turning it around, which has been great to see, because his July was not one to write home about after that cycle game. So
it was a miserable run after the All-Star break.
Yeah. And it's like, the truth was always somewhere in the middle with Peters. Like, I don't think he was the perennial 300 hitter he was looking like, but he also wasn't like the terrible version of him that couldn't even get on first base to save his life. So I think we're starting to see that balance out. And the only other guy I want to bring up here, because we haven't yet, is Murakami, because not only did he hit all those home runs against Detroit, but I feel like one undervalued thing about him is his consistency. I was actually really surprised. I looked at his OPS by month this year, and it's like 939, 937, 929, and then the current month. Like, he's always just solid. Whether it's more from home runs or from walks, he's always giving you that production. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if by the end of August, his OPS is like in the 920, 940 range once again. That's just kind of the hitter that he's turning into. So very much, the team very much needed those home runs this weekend, especially the one today. But having him back in the lineup and healthy has been such a blessing for everyone else too, because you see, people like Vargas benefiting from it.
ご視聴いただきありがとうございます。チャンネル登録、高評価お願いします。